Now we're going to talk about how and why blood flows through your body. Why does it go from the heart into the arteries to the arterioles, the capillaries, and back up? So this is basic physics kind of stuff. Basic physics. Don't get intimidated by that. I shouldn't have used that word. If you just understand and you think through it, it should make a lot of sense. So we're going to go through the basics here, and then we'll do examples and answer questions in class. So basic definitions: blood pressure is the force per unit area exerted on the wall of a vessel by the blood. So when the heart exerts blood or pushes blood through pressure, that blood is going to exert a pressure against the blood vessels. We talked about in the arteries how they're designed to be able to handle that pressure. Pressure difference between blood vessels is what's going to allow it to flow. So blood, like everything else we've talked about, goes from high to low pressure. Blood goes from high to low. Systolic blood pressure, when you get your blood pressure taken, let's say 120/80, which is average, it does not mean that it is normal. It just means that it's average. Your systolic, the number on top is the arterial blood pressure, because remember there's not a lot of pressure in veins. Arterial blood pressure during the systolic phase of the cardiac cycle. So when those ventricles are contracting. Diastolic pressure is the pressure during diastolic or diastole when the ventricles are filling with blood. We'll talk about these. I'll hopefully get a chance to teach you how to do blood pressures. So systolic is the top number, diastolic is the bottom number. This just goes through know that hypertension is when your blood pressure is too high. Hypertension is a major risk factor for heart disease, kidney disease, eye problems. Many people who have hypertension do not know that it's too high. If it runs in your family, it's something you probably want to have tested or looked at, which they usually do every time you go to the doctor. Hypotension, which I spelled wrong here, but hypotension is when your blood pressure is too low. That means that you're not getting enough pressure to get blood to all parts of your body. So sometimes when you get up and you feel kind of dizzy, that's your blood pressure adjusting, okay, adjusting to that. Some people can't stand up or can't exert enough pressure because their heart is weak, or they've been in bedridden for long periods of time. They can't get up without fainting, and that's because not enough blood's getting to their brain. Orthostatic hypotension is similar in that when you change positions, so when you go from laying down, your blood pressure is lower than when you're sitting, and when you go from sitting to standing, it goes up. So there's a natural adjustment to that. If you don't have that adjustment, if it doesn't go up as you change position, then that's what's called orthostatic hypotension, and again, it can make you very dizzy, and in some cases can actually make you faint. What is a pulse? What you're feeling with a pulse, and these are all different areas, and you can take them anywhere there's an artery. You're not going to feel a pulse in a vein, but you can take a pulse anywhere there's an artery close to the surface, and what you are feeling with a pulse, you're not feeling the heartbeat, you are feeling a change in pressure. So imagine systolic, diastolic, you're feeling that change in pressure in that blood vessel. Anywhere you can take a pulse, you can theoretically take a blood pressure. So most commonly we take it around the upper arm, and you're using the brachial artery. Some of you may experience, depending on the jobs, you may experience taking it on a leg, which is supposed to be very difficult. Technically, you could take it around someone's neck, but that would not be a good thing, because when you pumped up the little cuff, it would cut off blood flow to their head, so you don't want to do that. But you can technically take it anywhere, and we'll go through how to take pulse correctly also. All right, so here we have a bear who was hibernating. This is a far side from before most of you were born, and so they all thought he was dead, but he was really hibernating, where his pulse and blood pressure just actually went very low, which is one of the reasons they can do that. All right, so what affects blood flow through the vessels? Resistance is going to oppose movement of blood. So as soon as that blood is pumped from the heart, there is resistance that decreases the flow. Okay? So as the resistance goes up, the flow goes down, blood flow goes down, and blood pressure goes down. So if we start from the heart and go through the arteries, arterioles, and capillaries, the resistance is going to go up, the flow is going to go down, and the blood pressure is also going to go down. So what causes resistance? The first cause of resistance is the diameter of the blood vessel. Which of these blood cells is going to meet the most resistance? The one on the edge or the one in the middle? The answer is the ones on the edge are going to meet more resistance because they're going to be banging up against the side of the blood vessel. So As the diameter goes down or gets smaller, the resistance goes up. So as this branches, which is what happens, you go from arteries to arterioles, the blood vessel gets smaller. As the blood vessel gets smaller, there's more resistance because more of the blood cells are banging up against the wall. So arteries have a bigger diameter than arterioles. Arterioles, smaller diameter. So from a big diameter, smaller diameter, it's going to make a difference. So as diameter, I'll come back to this. As you get smaller and smaller blood vessels, you have increased resistance. Okay. Now, there's two types of flow that deal with diameter. Blood on the inside of the vessel travels faster than blood away from the lumen. And the lumen is just an opening. So it's just what I just told you. These are going to travel slower because they have more resistance. So more resistance decreases flow. Now, when I teach you blood pressures, I'm going to have you try to find the brachial artery, and you will be able to do that. And then when you put the cuff on the upper arm, I'm going to have you take the stethoscope and put it on the brachial artery, and you should not hear anything. So even though you can feel a pulse, you can't hear a pulse. When things are traveling smoothly through blood vessels, then you will not hear it, and that is called laminar flow. But if there is something protruding like this. So let's say your carotid arteries, which are the ones that go to your head, if they have a blood clot in them or they are building up blockages, okay, or atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque, your doctor, and hopefully you guys are way too young, and even my doctor hasn't done it on me yet, but what'll happen is blood will not flow through there smoothly. You'll get what's called turbulent flow, and you can hear that. So when a doctor takes a stethoscope and puts it on your carotid artery, you don't want them to hear anything. If they do hear flow like that turbulent flow, that means there could be a blockage there. It also happens with heart murmurs, which I'll discuss when we do blood pressures. Okay. So the second cause of resistance, diameter is one, is that diameter gets smaller, resistance goes up, and flow goes down. The second thing that causes resistance is the blood viscosity, the thickness of the blood. Now remember, when we talked about blood, we talked about the formed elements and we talked about the plasma. So the thickness of the blood is going to be based on how much of your blood is red blood cells, how much of your blood is plasma. The thicker the blood, the more resistance. So the thicker the blood, the higher the resistance, it decreases flow. Okay, so you increase the viscosity, you decrease the flow because you're increasing resistance. There's just not that water there to allow the blood cells to move through. So think of it as comparing if you took a hose and put water through it, how it would travel through, as opposed to taking something like honey and trying to get it to flow through a hose. The viscosity is a lot higher in the honey and it cannot flow well. So this is why water is so important in your plasma in your blood. If you decrease the water, you increase the resistance, you decrease the flow. So when someone becomes severely dehydrated, there's several dangers, but one of the dangers is their blood will just be so thick that it can't get to the organs of their body like their heart and their brain, and they can die of that. So someone who's severely dehydrated, someone who's blood doping, which we've discussed, can increase the viscosity and decrease the flow to the point that the person does not survive. So when someone's in heat stroke, they've lost a lot of water. Their body temperature is not being regulated. Their blood is also getting thicker. The third cause of resistance is an increase in vessel length. So the farther you get away from the source of the pressure, in this case, the farther you get away from the heart, the more resistance there is. So as the vessel length increases, resistance increases. As resistance increases, flow decreases. Okay? So the farther from the heart, higher resistance, the lower the blood flow. The lower the blood flow, the lower the blood pressure. Okay? So keep saying that to yourself. As you increase resistance, you decrease flow, and you decrease blood pressure. As you increase resistance, you decrease flow, and you decrease blood pressure. By the time we get the blood to the capillaries, we want there only to be a minimal amount of pressure. Too much pressure on those capillaries and they will rupture. All right, so just to review what changes resistance, blood vessel diameter does. As the diameter gets smaller, the resistance goes up, the flow goes down, the pressure goes down. As the blood becomes thicker, the resistance goes up, the flow goes down. And the last thing, as you get farther away from the pump, resistance goes up, flow goes down, pressure goes down. Again, the goal is that we want the blood to move, and to move it has to have pressure. But by the time we get down to these capillaries, we want the pressure to be minimal. Okay? So blood moves from the heart through the capillaries because of the heart pumping and exerting pressure. That resistance goes up, the pressure goes down by the time we get to the capillaries. But now the blood has to get back. It has to get back to the heart without little hearts to exert pressure to get the blood to move through the veins. We'll go through that later, how veins move blood. Okay. All right, so in class, after you've watched this, we will then go through and talk about the change in pressure. So look at this graph. Here's systolic, diastolic pressure. As you go from the aorta to the arteries to arterioles, the pressure goes down. The pressure continues to go down when we get into the venules, veins, and vena cava. But yet this blood still has to find a way to get back to the heart. And we'll talk about how in class. We also will answer these questions that are in the rest of the PowerPoint. We will do that in class.